Hey there, TouchDesigner developers. DiLaura here with the Interactive and Immersive HQ. In this video, we're going to cover a brief introduction to the new TouchDesigner Python Environment Manager component. This is a really fabulous component that made its debut in the experimental version over the summer and has finally made the shift over to the official release as of October 30th with the TouchDesigner 2025.31.550 release. The component aims to improve and ease the interaction between TouchDesigner and side-loaded Python environments. With this new tool, we have a super simple and streamlined way of setting up either a Python virtual environment or a Conda environment. So we'll take a look at setting up each type of virtual environment in TouchDesigner. We'll also take a brief look at a concrete application of these tools that's a little bit more advanced, but was provided over on the derivative blog that shows you how to set up a custom component that loads the depth anything v2 model into TouchDesigner and lets you take any texture, as you can see on the left, and generate a depth texture, as you can see on the right. So lots of fun stuff to cover, and with that, we'll jump right into things. For any newer users to TouchDesigner, I thought I'd give a bit of context as to why we're so excited about this new TouchDesigner Python Environment Manager tool. TouchDesigner and Python have been tightly integrated for a while now. And what's so amazing about this integration is that we have access to almost any aspect of the program via Python classes and modules. So we have here a listing of all the different class types that we have available, along with some helper classes that are not directly related to the operators themselves. We also have access to the standard Python modules here, and then some additional utility modules that are TouchDesigner specific. Along with that, we have a number of third-party packages that are installed with TouchDesigner by default, and those give us a huge variety of additional features that are not included in that core set of Python modules. So up until the introduction of this tool, if you were working with Python and you wanted to, let's say, install some additional third-party packages that are not included in this list and don't come with the TouchDesigner installation by default, what you would have to do is to come to this Python documentation page and scroll down to the installing custom Python packages section. Basically, what we would have to do is to install a parallel copy of Python onto your computer that matches the version that is found within TouchDesigner, and then use that external version of Python to access the pip install command, install the library there on your machine, and then, well, first of all, link TouchDesigner to that external instance of Python and then import the code from there. That's fine, but what this means is every time that you would then take this file, let's say your TouchDesigner project that imports this code and try to deploy it on another machine, you would have to go through this process again. It would also be a little bit different whether you were using a Windows machine or a Mac machine, because on Mac, you could use Homebrew to manage your Python installations, and on Windows, you could not. So the process would have to be repeated every time you'd want to use that TouchDesigner project on a different computer, and the procedure to get to your final result would be different depending on your operating system. Now, over the years, we've had some great resources like this one posted, which give information on managing Python environments and third-party libraries, this time with Anaconda rather than just installing an additional version of Python on your machine. But again, there's a lot of manual steps involved and some caveats and differences between the Windows and Mac OS versions. So we still have a large number of steps to go through to set up and link that environment. That said, with the introduction of the new TouchDesigner Python Environment Manager tool, this methodology is now obsolete. What the TouchDesigner Python Environment Manager component allows us to do is to sideload virtual environments and integrate third-party libraries more easily into TouchDesigner. It's designed to become your home base when working with side-loaded environments and third-party libraries. And their goal really is to make this the trusted go-to solution for users and developers. So it's really an amazing tool that significantly streamlines the process of installing these environments and having access to third-party libraries. But along with that, it also makes it much easier to then deploy that same environment on another machine. So really all credit for the content of this video goes to Michel Didier at Derivative for writing this very comprehensive and helpful article, which fully explains and goes through this new TouchDesigner Python Environment Manager component. I'll of course link to this article in the description. And again, thanks to Michel Didier at Derivative for putting this together. One final thing that I thought would be useful to cover before we get into things is the difference between the two options we have for environments with this tool. Especially for beginners, you might be wondering, why have the ability to create a Python virtual environment versus a Conda environment? And they have some brief descriptions that kind of explain that in the article. So the Python virtual environment is actually the default setup when you are working with TouchDesigner Python Environment Manager. And the goal with this option is to enable just one virtual environment per project folder that has a limited set of features for a common and streamlined approach. We can also choose to install a Conda environment instead. This allows us to install Conda packages along with the typical pip packages that we have accessible in the Python environment. We can also specify the install folder in which the environments will be looked for and created. And crucially, we can create multiple Conda environments. Another interesting aspect of the Conda option is that we can also list Conda environments that are installed globally on the machine. So there may be certain situations where you're looking to use packages that are exclusive to the Conda package manager. It's commonly used in data science, and there are some machine learning libraries for it as well. So it's definitely nice to have the option. The first thing that we're going to need to do is to make sure that you have installed the latest version of TouchDesigner, which as of recording is 2025.31550. The TDPyEnvManager Manager tool was in the experimental version prior to this official release. So if you're running an older version, it's likely that you're not going to have access to this tool. So make sure that you've updated to at least that version. Then we're going to head back to TouchDesigner, where we're going to need to create a project folder and a TOE file. So we can do this in a number of ways. We could create a folder manually and then save a TOE file into that folder, or we can use the create project folder dialog, which you can access via the file dropdown create project folder. This is going to let you select a path on your computer where you can create a project folder, and then it will automatically create a TOE file as well. So we can specify the path where we want that to be created. We can give the project folder a name, which I've just chosen here, TDPyEnvManager _py, because we're going to be looking at how to create a Python virtual environment as well as a Conda virtual environment in the second example. So for this first one, I've chosen py at the end to denote that we're creating a Python environment. And then we also have the option here to rename the TOE file that is created to that project folder's name .toe. So I'm going to leave that setting on. We also have a bunch of options here for creating media folders, and I don't need any of those for this example, so I'm going to turn all of those options off. Once this is all set up and looking good, you can go ahead and hit create, and it will automatically create that file. So with that complete, let's head back to TouchDesigner. And our first order of business is to add the component to our project. So this is going to be found under the tools folder in the palette. We'll scroll down to the bottom and you'll see TDPyEnvManager, and you can left click and drag that into your network. To start, we want to make sure that this active switch has been turned on. And you'll notice that we then have this little status parameter here, which basically is going to give us a message telling us the current state of things in our environment manager tool. So right now it's telling us that it hasn't been able to find a valid virtual environment, and we should create one to continue. After that, we have the ability to select what type of virtual environment we want to create, whether we want to create a Python environment or a Conda environment. And like I said before, we're going to do Python for this first example. So we're just going to leave that at the default state. To create that environment, we're going to click the Create vEnv Pulse button. And when we do that, what we'll see is then our status updates and says creating Python virtual environment. There's a little loading animation, and likewise, the component itself has this little loading animation appearing there. Once that completes, we'll see this status message, environment linked and ready. Now, just to show you what has happened in our project folder, the TDPyEnvManager Manager tool has gone ahead and created a folder up top with the same name as our project folder, and then it adds a little underscore vEnv at the end. So this is going to be a consistent naming convention regardless of what operating system or machine you're on. And that's part of how this tool is aiming to make this sort of setup a little bit more universal and accessible regardless of what machine you're deploying it on. So anyway, that's going to automatically create that folder and build out a bunch of things within there for that virtual environment. Now we're going to go ahead and close this and head back to TouchDesigner. Then we're going to go ahead and open up the command line interface. And it's here that we can start using our typical pip install commands to install additional libraries that we might want to have access to in our TouchDesigner project. Now, what I'm going to do here is to follow the article that we looked at the beginning and install the ZMQ package. So I'm going to type in pip install ZMQ, hit enter. That should take a couple of seconds to collect all that stuff from the repository. And then when it has successfully installed, we should see a little message here that says successfully installed. And we can test whether or not this is actually accessible in TouchDesigner by heading back to TouchDesigner and opening up the text port. So I'm going to open up the dialogues dropdown and click on text port and DATS. We can also use Alt or Option and T on the keyboard to open it up. We've got some errors here. That's okay. I'm just going to clear these out, and we're going to then type in import ZMQ to import that library that we've just added. That hasn't thrown us any errors, so that's a good sign. Now I'm going to type in ZMQ, hit enter, and what we should see is this little module listing that shows us the exact location of that library on our computer. So that means now we can use this import statement in our Python code in TouchDesigner and have full access to this library. And as you probably already realized, this is so much simpler in terms of setup than the sort of previous methods that we had available. Now, let's say that you wanted to share this particular virtual environment setup with someone else. What we can do is to export a requirements.txt file. So you can see here, we've got an option under Create Virtual Environment where we can choose to export that file. So I'm going to click that. We'll see a short little loading sequence there. And then if we open up the project folder, we'll find that requirements.txt file. So that is going to contain all of the different libraries that we have imported and their particular versions, so that we share this file with someone else. It will allow them to set their virtual environment up exactly as we have done so here. Now, according to the article, this is not an optimal requirements.txt file, and you may need to go through and manually curate it to avoid setting too many version restrictions and potentially add an extra index URL line within the file. That said, with this created, we can now share that with someone else and allow them to, again, recreate this environment that we have set up. So just to illustrate this, I'm going to create a second project and project folder that currently is empty and use that requirements.txt file to set up a second identical virtual environment. So I'm going to hit create. I've got this new project set up, and I can simply copy the requirements.txt file into this directory like so, and then head back into TouchDesigner where I'll add TDPyEnvManager Manager for a second time, make sure my active switch is on, and then I can choose to create from requirements.txt. Now that's going to take a second again, but we'll have a look once it's all set up that ZMQ library has been successfully imported. So with that complete, we can open up the text port again, which I'll do by hitting Alt and T on the keyboard. I'm going to clear out my text port, and then I should be able to, just like before, type in import ZMQ and then ZMQ. And once again, I should see this module is located within the project folder. And you can see right here, I've got TDPyEnvManager Manager _ py2. That is the new folder that I've set up. So just by sharing that simple file and using this pulse button here, we can automatically recreate that setup. Now, again, it's important to note that you will need to place that requirements.txt file alongside your TOE file in order for this to function. Now, in the situation where you have a matching folder of the same name already present, meaning your project name _ vEnv, that folder is not going to get cleared. The environment will get created if a file is missing in the target folder, but an existing environment will be unaffected unless there is a change in dependencies caused by the Python built-ins or a possible requirements.txt file being present. This is valid for both creating a bare-bone virtual environment from TouchDesigner or creating a virtual environment with a requirements.txt file being present. Note that this is true for the Python virtual environment that we're setting up now, but is not true of the Conda environment that we'll be setting up later. At that point in the video, we'll cover what happens when you run into the same situation but are using a Conda environment instead. In this next example, we're going to have a look at setting up a Conda virtual environment instead. So like before, I'm going to create a project folder. This time I've added _Conda at the end of the name. I'm going to hit create. There's my new file, and we'll drag in the TDPyEnvManager tool just like we did before. With that added, this time around, we're going to use the mode drop down here and grab Conda environment instead. Then we'll see a different set of options appear at the bottom here, and we're going to leave this Conda install folder option alone, but we will provide an environment name, which we're going to use the same one that's listed in the article, my super Conda env. With that name added, we're going to click the Create Conda Environment pulse. You'll get a little terms of service agreement that you want to hit continue on. And after that, it'll go through the process of downloading the installer and installing the environment. This is going to take a little bit longer than the Python setup, so we'll jump back in once this is complete. So our environment is linked and ready, which means we're all set. But I did want to point out that you can complete this process offline. So you don't necessarily have to have an internet connection for this to work. You can download the installer for Conda separately and drop it into your project folder. And if you choose to keep the Conda installer with this toggle switch, it will use that file and it will then leave it here for future use. So typically what happens when you are connected to the internet is when we click the Create Conda Environment pulse button, it's going to download that installer. And then once it's downloaded, go through the installation process and delete the installer file. By choosing the Keep Conda Installer option, it will leave that file in our project folder so that we can then use it later on. So like before, we're going to test that this is actually functional by opening our command line interface. This is going to take a second, but you notice that once this is up and running, over here on the left, we have this little note that indicates that our environment is active. So this is the name of that environment that I specified over here in the parameters. Just like before, we can use a series of installer commands to grab specific libraries that we want to access. We can use pip commands here as well, but we can also use Conda commands, which opens up a wider range of tools that we can access. Now, following the article, we're going to install the TQDM library, which is used for progress bars. And so in this case, I'm going to type in Conda install TQDM. Like before, this is going to take a little bit to download everything and install it, but this time around, you will have to interact a little bit and tell the system that you do want to proceed with the installation. And then once that's complete, you'll end up the place that we started in our command line interface. So with that, we're all set. we can come back to TouchDesigner, open up our text port as usual. Again, we're going to clear this out, and we should then be able to do our little import statement and then type in the name of that library. So import TQDM, enter, good, no errors, TQDM. And like before, we've got our module listing, and it is found within our project folder. So just like before, we can now access this library and use it in our TouchDesigner project. Now, before we move on to sharing this environment setup, I did want to point out that this global switch here allows us to access any additional Conda installations you might have on your machine that have Python versions that match TouchDesigner. So in that way, you can have full access to a number of libraries that you maybe have already set up on the machine outside of the project folder. Once those have been populated, you'd be able to choose your particular environment from this dropdown on the right. Now let's talk about sharing your Conda environment with another user. You can, in this case, export an environment.yml file by clicking the pulse button here. That'll take a second to export. And once it has completed, you'll see the environment.yml file in your project directory. So like before, I'm going to create a second instance of this project that's empty just to walk through the process of creating a new Conda environment. So I'm going to create this second version that has gone ahead and created the project folder and TOE file. And now I can copy my YML file directly into the project directory right alongside of the TOE file. Back in TouchDesigner, I can then drag my TDPyEnvManager tool into my project. I'll then want to switch the mode here to Conda environment, and I can choose then create from environment.yml. We have to agree to the terms of service, hit continue. This is going to take a bit again as we have to download and then install mini Conda. And once it's complete, we should see our status update. Once that process completes, we should see environment linked and ready at the top, and you'll notice that our environment parameter here has filled in with the name that we had specified previously. Now, the article mentions that if we have a matching environment with the same name that already exists, it will be overwritten by the environment.yml requirements. So that is a difference that is important to note there. Let's go ahead and test, like before, that we have that TM or TDQM library installed. So I'm going to import TQDM, TQDM, and there we go. We've got that module, and it's located within our project folder. Now that we've gone through that process, it's also important to note that for more advanced users, we don't have to just access these features through the parameter dialog and command line interface. You can actually use the TDPyEnvManager Manager programmatically using its extension, which has a bunch of promoted attributes and methods. And we have a helper that can also be used as a module, which has its own page in the wiki with all kinds of additional information. Along with that, it's possible to interact with the helper outside of TouchDesigner or without TouchDesigner even being open via a CLI. And we have some samples of how that is able to be set up and function in the TouchDesigner installation directory itself. So I've gone to the TouchDesigner version within my program files, and then the samples folder. And within that, you'll find a folder called TDPyEnvManager, where we've got some .sh and batch files for how you can start to use that tool set. Some further considerations from the article include not forcing initialization of components using an execute dat or initialize on start toggle. So when you're using TDPyEnvManager, this should be the first component initializing on start so that the environment is actually set up before any additional components attempt to import modules from it. You'll run into issues otherwise. So to fail that initialization gracefully, you can add a try except condition around your import statements at the top of your extension. Another tip from the article is that when you are working with VS Code, you can actually set up your code workspace to load both the TDI library along with the libraries that you've installed in your side-loaded environment. It provides an example settings file here, which has some extra paths added for not only TouchDesigner's inbuilt site packages folder, but also some relative references to a virtual environment that they've set up and a scripts folder. So in this way, those libraries that you might have installed with your side-loaded environment could be a part of that autocomplete and reference accessibility inside of your VS Code environment. So with that, we've reached the end of this article, but you may now be wondering, okay, great, especially if I'm a beginner to the program, what can I actually do with this tool set? Helpfully, they've written another article which showcases a concrete use case. It's a little bit advanced, I would say, for beginners, but does show you a really great advanced workflow where they walk through setting up a custom tool that lets you run this depth anything v2 model in TouchDesigner utilizing the TDPyEnvManager Manager tool along with this other tool called Thread Manager. So again, it's a little bit advanced, but helpfully they do walk you through all of the steps required to get this running. And along with that, also provide you with a GitHub link that gives you access to the final version of the file as well. But it's great to see the kind of thinking and the process of working at this level with these tools in this article for people who are wondering, how I can start to put this into practice. Just to give you a quick peek under the hood of what that example looks like, we're able to, when it's all set up, take an input image and generate from it a depth image, which we can then do whatever we like with in TouchDesigner. So it's a pretty impressive outcome, but really a great example of seeing how these tools start to be used in a more concrete real-world use case. Not only that, but Python has been a notable part of TouchDesigner for a while now, so there are plenty of other resources out there for working with some external Python libraries that now can be utilized in this new way with our Python Environment Manager. So really there's a lot of possibilities out there, but the core kind of takeaway here is that this new tool set makes it a lot easier for us to start working with these side-loaded environments and gives this ease of access to a much larger tool set that comes with the Python and Conda virtual environments. So anyway, I hope this has been a useful first look at the TouchDesigner Python Environment Manager tool. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next video.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free TouchDesigner and immersive content.